Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. Okay, guys. What made the P-51 Mustang so special? I think I saw a shorter video on P-51 Mustang, just kind of them in the hangar looking at a few of the parts. Or I could be confusing that with the Spitfire. Let's go. The original link to the video, top of the description. Below that, link to the Discord. We'd love to have you. Imperial War Museums, great channel. Let's go. Might have a lot of questions, but you guys are really good at answering, so.
In 1940, in the wartime, Great Britain was fighting with its backs against the wall. All the aeroplane manufacturers were struggling with orders, so overseas sources had to be looked at. The British Purchasing Company, the BPC, had an office in New York.
I was going to say, is the Mustang American?
Was placed for Curtiss for their P-40 design in New York. An order was placed for Curtiss for their P-40 design. In England, we call that a Kitty Hawk. The P-40 had its failings. The engine, an Allison V12, a good strong engine, but only really at low altitude. But even Curtiss couldn't cope with the order and approached North American if they'd like to take on the order to build a P-40 under license. The president of North American wasn't overly happy with that idea and approached the BPC for their own idea of a brand new designed aeroplane with the Allison V12 that was utilised in the P-40. The prototype appeared here at Duxford at the AFDU, the Air Fighting Development Unit.
Nice grass. Guys, I'm so confused if the, I could look it up, but if it's a British airplane that they wanted Americans to build, or if it's...
Now that aeroplane showed fantastic potential, a low-drag fuselage and a new laminar flow jet-type wing. But the aeroplane had the Allison V12 engine, and above 14,000 feet, the aeroplane would have probably come off second best to aeroplanes the Germans had, like the Messerschmitt 109G and the deadly Focke-Wulf 190. So one of the clever people at the Air Fighting Development Unit said, let's try it with a Rolls-Royce Merlin. Rolls-Royce were developing at the time the two-speed, two-stage and intercooled V12 that was initially going into the Mark 8 and the Mark 9 Spitfire. The swap was made, the Merlin engine was put on the front of the prototype, the Allison was put to the side, and that aeroplane became the P-51 Mustang.
Another outstanding example of Allied aircraft design is the Mustang. The Mustang is a fighter, sturdy and very fast. And here are some of these aircraft actually shooting up enemy military trains.
So with the addition of the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, the P-51 was a superlative aeroplane, able to fly and fight up to 35,000 feet, way above the Allison engine could have done. The idea was to build a fighter that could fly at 400 miles an hour in level flight and get to Berlin and back on its own fuel. So we have fuel in the wings, fuel underneath in the drop tanks, and the auxiliary tank as well here behind the pilot's seat. Secretly, in the wartime, rumour has it that the tank was taken out of one Mustang and a jump seat put in its place, so Eisenhower himself could survey the Normandy beaches. Obviously.
So, are they doing it to balance out the weight, having fuel tanks on both wings and in the fuselage, or is it just that there wasn't enough space in any part of the aircraft to have all the fuel, and so they had to put it into 3 separate tanks?
Fuel underneath in the drop tanks, secret on Mustang in the wartime and war era is obviously quite risky putting the Supreme Allied Commander in the back of a war aeroplane, but something with the speed and the range, the combatability of a Mustang, he was pretty safe. Another feature of the Mustang, the low drag fuselage. Of course, drag in a fighter aeroplane is extremely important indeed. They found by taking off the rivets, that would aid top speed performance by 10 to 15 knots. The radiator, very special, creates what's called a Meredith effect after a British scientist. In very, very basic layman's terms, the air goes in the front, heated by the radiator. This flap can squeeze what's coming out the outside and therefore causing a little bit of propulsion for the Mustang as well. On a traditional wing like this magnificent Spitfire here,
you would think that would, I would think intuitively that would slow down the airplane because
heatist in very, very basic layman.
So you're driving along, ramming through the air is going inside of this thing that no doubt if it were closed at the end would be a lot of drag. So why not make the opening even smaller? That's just strange to me how that can provide thrust, just getting air, ramming air, and it being heated up a bit and out of a smaller hole. Am I understanding that?
The air goes in the front, heated by the radiator. This flap can squeeze what's coming out the outside and therefore causing a little bit of propulsion for the Mustang as well.
See, in my dumb mind, that would just be like, no, that would just cause more drag.
On a traditional wing like this magnificent Spitfire here, the widest part of the wing is about 1/3 the way down. On the laminar flow wing of the Mustang, the widest part of the wing is 2/3 of the way down, so the disruption of the air is further back, therefore causing slightly less drag. Therefore, with the same engine, albeit built by license by Packard in the United States mainly, this aeroplane in a straight level flight was a good 20 knots faster than the Spitfire.
I only had one objection to the Mustang, and I assumed that, not being exactly a tall guy myself, I assumed that all American pilots must be giants. I only had one objection to the Mustang, and I assumed that, not being exactly a tall guy myself, I assumed that all American pilots must be giants. I used to sit on a yellow cushion, have a yellow cushion behind me. But it was a delight to fly. It trimmed beautifully, it maneuvered beautifully. I almost looked upon it as the American Spitfire. Giants. I used to sit on a yellow cushion, have a yellow cushion behind me. But it was almost looked upon an American Spitfire.
It's still so amazing to me, guys, that propellers can propel an aircraft fast enough to create lift on the wings. That still kind of blows my mind. Like a helicopter. Yeah.
I almost the American Spitfire.
The American 8th Air Force is contributing more and more to the Allies' round-the-clock air offensive, particularly with its heavily armed flying fortresses.
The United States Army Air Force thought that the B-17s, bombing in the daytime, with 10 very brave young lads on board, covered in 13 50 caliber machine guns, would be able to protect itself. Unfortunately, that was a mistake to the tune of about 30,000 of their finest young men. Initially, the escorts of the groups of bombers based all around East Anglia was the P-47 Thunderbolt, a fantastic aeroplane, very heavy, very fast in a dive, fantastic firepower with 8 50 caliber machine guns. But when they were getting to the end of the limit of their fuel, they could see the swarms of Luftwaffe 109s and Fokkels waiting for the bombers that they were escorting on the way. They had to just let them go into the swarms of Luftwaffe until the advent of the P-51 with its drop tanks. Initially, when P-47s were replaced for the Mustangs, a lot of the pilots were quite skeptical. They loved their big, heavy, powerful, fast P-47s. But most of them, when they got into the very light, maneuverable Mustang that could battle with anything, they soon got used to the aeroplane. When the P-51 arrived in Duxford from Christmas 1944 until the end of the war, drop tacks made out of papier-mâché, very big but very light, fitted to the Mustangs, could carry the fuel all the way. So in the event that they could see the Luftwaffe coming to attack the bombing formations, all the Mustangs had to do was drop their drop tanks and get into the battle. The Mustangs with their drop tanks could fly and fight all the way to Berlin and back again.
That's genius.
that they could see could carry the fuel all the way.
So they're using so did I hear he said paper mache or whatever, but paper mache, like you create in elementary school, like around a balloon or something. So they have a super light, probably not that reliable container is in the paper mache to carry fuel. It doesn't have to be that reliable because you're gonna. So you use up that fuel first. When you see the battle, drop those, and then you have your full fuel, right?
So in the event that they could see the Luftwaffe coming to attack the bombing formations, all the Mustangs had to do was drop their drop tanks and get into the battle. The Mustangs with their drop tanks could fly and fight all the way to Berlin and back again. Hermann Göring was actually supposed to have said when he saw Mustangs over Berlin, he knew the war was lost. Towards the end of the war, the Allies held air superiority. The Mustangs were a fantastic part in that battle.
We only did one to Berlin.
Guys, it really does, like, what was the biggest... Do you guys think that if the Soviet Union fell, that... Like, what do you think there was a bigger chance of the Allies still being able to defeat the Germans? The Soviet Union losing, or America never joining the war at all? Maybe they were joining in the Pacific because of Pearl Harbor, right? They were fighting them. But I wonder, because it's like so many of your men, if you're German, are fighting the Russians, and then you have this behemoth of, the United States, all of these factories that are too far away to bomb, just nonstop equipment. I wonder if even if the Russians surrendered, if Britain and the Allies still could have successfully landed in Normandy. Or do you think that if the Allies never stepped foot in Europe, mainland Europe, do you think that Russia still would have been able to defeat Germany and reach Berlin?
We actually went with the bombers, which meant weaving all the time. When we got there, we turned and came straight for home. In the meantime, the Americans had gone straight there and then came weaving back with the bombers. That's how it was done. And you imagine the aeroplanes in the sky over Berlin. I've never seen anything like it.
The Mustang was not only used for escort duty. Because of its fantastic performance, it could fly and fight with the best of them. A P-51D was equal to anything the Germans had in the air with a fan at the front. The Messerschmitt 109G, G6, G10, G16, and the K model at the end, plus the Focke-Wulf 190A. A Mustang was also quite fearsomely well armed, with 6 50 caliber machine guns, 3 in each wing. A 50 caliber bullet is much bigger than the British round in a Spitfire, which is only a 303. Flying.
That's the 50 BMG round, right?
Low.
I don't even know what BMG stands for.
Way back from escort duty, British round in a Spitfire, which is only a 303. Flying low on the way back from escort duty, low and fast. Mustangs would take out targets of opportunity. German staff cars, trains, trucks, narrowboats. Nothing was safe from a Mustang travelling back to East Anglia from occupied France. Towards the end of the war, the Luftwaffe had obviously got the Messerschmitt 262 swept-wing jet, far and away in design above anything that the Allies had. However, when they were landing and when they were taking off, they were very, very vulnerable, and Mustangs caught 1 or 2 of them in such a position.
What it did have was a terrific, what you call a dive and zoom. In other words, you'd be going straight up and roll around a full 360 degrees and roll off and still fly off. With the spit, no matter how fast you went down, how much you shoved your throttle through, instead of flying out, you'd fall out. You'd lost your airspeed. But with a Mustang, you had no bother at all. You keep going up and you keep going like the clappers,
In American service, obviously the Mustang is a P-51, a P-51B, C or D. In RAF service, the Mustang was basically a Mark I, a Mark II, a Mark III, and so on. A Mustang, in a lot of cases, started to replace the British fighters purely because of its range. Some pilots didn't like it because it wasn't, maybe in some cases, have the rate of climb or as manoeuvrable as a Spitfire, but had the range and certainly had the comfort. There is quite a bit more space for the pilot in a Mustang cockpit than a Spitfire. Not so much the B and C model P-51, but the P-51D, a huge perspex canopy. Visibility can be the difference of life or death to a fighter pilot.
First of all, it was a little bigger plane, very comfortable inside. The visibility was very good, not as maneuverable as Spitfire, but more luxurious.
I flew the P-51, the 47, the 38, the Spitfire, so I could get a good knowledge about these airplanes. Besides the flight performance of these aircraft, I mean, the P-51 was an excellent airplane. They had very comfortable cockpits because they flew for hours. You can put a pilot in a cockpit like we had in the 109 and let him fly for hours. He gets out as a stiff man, you know. So these were very comfortable and very good things.
They keep bringing up the cockpit size. And I'm like, really? That's it? But him saying right there, I'd imagine a lot of people with experience flying these aircraft, cockpit size wouldn't exactly be on the top of their mind, because obviously you don't want to be uncomfortable, but I feel like but they're all a lot of them are mentioning it, and clearly it was a big deal psyche-wise, and you could sit for longer.
The Mustang behind me is painted to represent an aeroplane of the 355th Fighter Group based just down the road from Duxford at Steeple Morden. At Duxford here, the 78th Fighter Group used Mustangs from Christmas 1944 till the end of the war in 1945. This magnificent Mustang behind me is not the only Mustang that you can see at Imperial War Museum Duxford. We have the American Air Museum, a memorial building opened by Her Majesty the Queen and dedicated to the memory of the 30,000 United States airmen lost flying from British bases from 1941 to 1945. We have an American Mustang in there, a P-51, painted to represent that of the pilot Huey Lamb, who graced us with his presence when the aeroplane was unveiled.
We flew straight back, and I remember vividly, I was joined by another Mustang, a stranger Mustang, because we'd all sort of mixed up, with this big American smoking a cigar, and I thought we weren't allowed to smoke in our aeroplanes. And I didn't think this chap would insist on flying close to me, and I thought, if he wants to blow himself up, I hope he doesn't get too close to me.
The story of the Mustang did not end with the end of war in 1945, but carried on. Such was the good design of the aeroplane. Mustangs indeed served in the Korean War in 1950. After the Korean War, there were lots of Mustangs spare on the civil register. And if you're wealthy enough, you could purchase a Mustang. So you've got an aeroplane with 1,700 horsepower, a four-bladed variable pitch, then constant speed propeller, an aeroplane that can do
1,700? Weren't some of the other planes I was learning about on this channel have like 400?
430 miles an hour in speed propeller, an aeroplane that can do 430 miles an hour in straight and level flight. You have got a serious piece of kit here. An often overused word is iconic, but I can't think of a better one. But a household name and loved by both pilots and indeed families today, and delighting air shows all over the world.
I want to watch this one too.
Because of its fantastic...
Really great video, guys. Hope you guys are doing well. I'd appreciate any comments. You guys are always really good with that when I'm confused. I'll see you guys next time. Bye, guys.